Good evening, YouTube. This is your favorite apologist back, the AK, Atheist Killer, better known as Chad Elliott, Mr. 530. This video I'm about to do tonight is a video called Defending the Elliott Argument. Now, this video is very important for those of you who wish to use the Elliott Argument. So we're going to get right into this. For those of you who don't know, basically the Elliott argument states that if you deny the uncreated creator option as the cause of the universe, then you are only left with two options, both of which are irrational, illogical, and have zero evidence. To see this formal argument and all of its premises, you can go click on the video that's titled The Elliott Argument. It's under my video uploads, so you can check that out. But this video I'm doing right now is basically to teach people how to use and defend the Elliott argument and basically win every single debate that you have with atheists in the future. So let's begin. I feel like the first order of business is really to define some terms that are used in the argument. That way people don't feel like they're being misled, or they won't fail to understand the foundation of the argument itself, because that's happened on more than one occasion. First, let's define atheist. Atheism is a disbelief in any god, gods, or deities. So atheists are people that disbelieve in God's existence. Now, let's define the uncreated creator. The uncreated creator is by definition uncreated and never began to exist but is eternal. The uncreated creator is also spaceless, timeless, immaterial, all-powerful, and personal. Important to remember, since he is personal, he can decide when he wants to create, and therefore does not face the problems of infinite regress. Next, let's define the acronym STE in the Elliott argument, which is an acronym that I created that stands for Space and Time Are Eternal. Now, this is very important. This is an important part. Normally, when you hear someone speak about space and time, you think of it being in a naturalistic sense. But it's important to remember that STE in the Elliott argument is an acronym that is devised actually to cover a broad range, meaning not just space and time in a natural sense, but also space and time outside of our universe, including space and time in any proposed void or This is so we don't have any issues with anyone claiming STE is a fallacy of equivocation, and we are upfront from the beginning about it, which really it's not a fallacy of equivocation anyways, because fallacy of equivocation basically occurs, when a word switches meaning in the middle of an argument, or when a word expresses one concept in one premise and another concept in another premise. But STE in the Elliott argument can be thought of more like an umbrella. By its very definition, STE covers all imaginable space and time concepts. So next we need to define what we mean by time to the STE acronym in the Elliott argument. Space and time are closely related, almost one and the same. The concept of time only ceases to exist in the absence of space and events. If you only have one or the other, then there still is time. There has to be an absence of both for the concept of time not to exist. If there are any events happening, there is time. If there is any form of space, natural or supernatural, there is time. This is how we are defining time in the STE acronym for the Elliott argument. So that's the definition of time that I'm using in my argument. I created the argument, I created the acronym, and that's how I'm defining it. For any of those of you who don't know or would like to ask how I'm defining it, there you go. In other words, we're using it in its most broadest sense again. Next, we need to define what pure nothingness is in our SCP-NCEU option. Pure nothingness would be no space, time, energy, matter, laws, constants, structure, etc. The concept of pure, literal nothingness. So this brings us to premise number 1 of the Elliott argument, which states both STE and SCP-NCEU are illogical, irrational, and have zero evidence. really, I don't get too many objections to premise number one, but if you do, of course, you have to be ready, so we'll get right into this. First, why is it true that STE is irrational, illogical, and has no evidence? First, what you need to do to your opponent is claim that there is no evidence that space and time are. If they disagree, please ask them to present it. I am yet to hear even an attempt at this. I am assuming because there is no evidence at all. Next, why is STE irrational and illogical? This is simple, and I will give you two examples as a demonstration. If you had an unlimited amount of past eternity for us to have come into being, it would have happened already. Yet, here we are today. If you have an infinite amount of time for cause after cause, it never gets to be our turn, because there was no starting point and time before us was endless. Secondly, imagine if you're standing in a line with people in front of you. Do you ever get your turn? The answer is no. You never get your turn because the line in front of you goes on and on forever and it never gets to you. Yet, here we are today getting our turn. So next we need to look at SCP in CEU, which is something can come from pure nothingness and then create entire universes. So why is SCP in CEU irrational, illogical, and have no evidence? First of all, to your opponent, again, make the claim that there is no evidence something can come from pure nothingness, and say if they have any evidence, then please provide it, or please present it. The atheist's only hope here is to bring up quantum physics, quantum mechanics, something like virtual particles. But remind them that any concept of quantum physics appear in what is known as the quantum vacuum. The quantum vacuum is a sea of fluctuating energy, a rich physical reality, endowed with structure and governed by physical laws. It's emphatically not pure nothingness. So that evidence fails. Once they are unable to provide evidence that something can come from our definition, pure nothingness, then ask them to provide evidence something can create entire universes. Their hope here is to point out the fact that our universe exists. But our universe is the subject we are discussing, so that's not evidence that anything can create entire universes. Then they will try to sidetrack you and talk about redshifts or microwave radiation backgrounds to show that the universe is in fact expanding. They do this to show if you ran the clock backwards, it takes you back to a proposed singularity or super condensed tiny pinpoint of energy. Again, this is not evidence anything, including a pinpoint of energy or singularity, can create entire universes. It's only providing evidence that our universe had a starting point and began to exist. It's not evidence for what that starting point was. So, it is true that there is no evidence whatsoever for SCP in CEU. Then, we need to get into why it is illogical and irrational. Well, first of all, when we see something, it's logical to assume or conclude that it was caused or that it came from somewhere. Second of all, we know that 0 plus 0 never equals 1. So assuming 0 plus 0 could ever equal laws, intelligence, constants, structure, information, energy, life, matter, etc. is complete insanity. I had someone say, yeah, that may be true, but -1 plus 1 equals 0. And the universe is essentially nothing anyways. But that equation is not pure nothingness, because in their equation they put in a +1. And in a pure nothingness, you never have a +1. You only have zeros to add together. And finally, we know that nothingness only breeds more nothingness. So, this brings us to premise number 2, which states that if you deny the uncreated creator option as the cause of our universe, then your only two options are STE or SCP in CEU. I would say generally that this premise is the one that gets 90% of the attention. So first of all, is this a false dichotomy? The direct answer is no, it's not a false dichotomy. It's not a false dichotomy because it's a 100% undeniable, concrete fact that if you deny the uncreated creator option, whatever you can think of will in fact fall under either STE or SCP in CEU. So while yes, it is true that the atheist can present an unlimited amount of options, the fact remains that no matter what option they present, it will in fact fall under one of the two provided categories. If they make the claim that they have a third option that does not fall under one of these categories, remember then that the burden of proof is now on them to explain their option. And this means you need to break it down to its core foundation and show them where it falls. And they must answer any direct question that you ask of them about their proposed third option, because it's their story. They're the one attempting to provide a third option and tell you about it. They have to be willing to define it and answer direct questions. Remind them that they must be willing to define their option that they're attempting to present it. Yes, I said that. Some good questions to ask right off the bat about a proposed third option that you make them answer is, where does their third option exist? Is their third option eternal? If it did not begin to exist, was it created and where did it come from? These initial questions and questions like this will start the process of breaking it down and narrowing down exactly where their option falls and proving it in fact is not a third option at all. It's also important to remember here that when there are only two possibilities, saying I don't know is not presenting a third option. Example, the atheist can say, I don't know if I should choose STE or SCP-NCEU, but his problem is still that it's still either STE or SCP-NCEU. So saying I don't know is not actually presenting us with a third option. Another note is that if an atheist claims that they don't have to choose STE or SCP-NCEU, and that atheism is simply a disbelief. I get this all the time. Atheists say, atheism is just a disbelief in gods, or a god or deities. Well, if they say this, they're failing to grasp the logic of the Elliott argument. While it is true they don't have to specifically choose one or the other, they do have to be honest enough to admit that as an atheist, they only have two options, and both of the options are irrational, illogical, and have no evidence. Okay, now, YouTube only lets me upload videos up to 15 minutes long. This video is already at maybe 12 minutes and 30 seconds. So we're going to stop this, and this is Defending the Elliott Argument, Part 1. I'm going to stop this, and to continue on, go over and click on another video called Defending the Elliott Argument, Part 2, where I will continue where I left off here. Alright, I'm out. Peace!